Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 41, and we're doing chapters 65 through 69 of Words of Radiance. We have Kaladin getting out of prison this week. We have Adolin staying in prison with him and some of the ramifications of that. We have some interesting banter between a couple different of our main characters. We have Shalon and Kaladin banter. We have Kaladin and Adolin banter. We've got some good conversations to talk about this week before we fall into the chasms later. Anyway, Eliot, do you have 2 words to summarize this episode?
As always, my 2 words this week go together. My 2 out of chapters was moral character.
Moral character. Okay. And Paul, do you have 2 words?
I do, and mine also go together. I have dire circumstances.
Dire circumstances and moral character. Okay, let's use these words and talk about episode 41. All right, Elliot, I will bounce it back to you. You can, how are you doing? And you can tell me a little bit more about your 2 words.
I'm doing well. Things are getting adrenaline pumping here in Words of Radiance. I feel like we're really getting to the climax, or at least it feels that way. We'll see where it goes after this, but excited for these chapters, for what we've been reading lately. Moral character, mainly, honestly, I because of Adolin. I was really impressed by his moral character here in this chapter when he decides to voluntarily put himself in jail alongside Kaladin. Like, I did not expect that at all, and it was kind of like a whoa, that's super honorable, and I thought that was awesome. But I think there's a few other things in these chapters that reveal some of our characters' moral character as well. I think Kaladin has a moment in these chapters where he agrees to help Moash assassinate Elokar. I think that Dalinar's moral character again in this chapter when he realizes that versions of his visions are getting out there to the public, and I think he responds pretty well to that. Yeah, a lot of testing of moral character, some characters doing better with it than others.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Paul, tell me about your 2 words. How you doing?
I'm doing well. So my 2 words are dire circumstances, and mostly what I meant with this, they don't go together that well, but it is kind of like a play there. So dire is mostly pointing at Kaladin in the later chapters here, and his weakening bond with Syl that we kind of start to learn about, and his surge binding powers there. It seems to be in a dire situation, I guess. That's the main reason. With circumstances, it's mostly with, we see that Kaladin and Shalon kind of end up together, which I think is kind of ironic and funny. And also with Adolin staying in the cell with Kaladin, and all of Kaladin's interactions there with Win and all the stuff there, I think is just kind of funny circumstances. So that's why I went with that.
Gotcha. I'm just looking at our outline, and it's kind of dawning on me that we have a very turbulent episode this week. We're gonna start with chapter 65, which is pretty depressing, and then 66 and 67 are gonna feel pretty good, and then we're gonna go back down, and we're gonna have troubles with Syl. But we'll get to all that here in a second. We can start with chapter 65. Chapter 65 is a Shalon flashback chapter, and it's a few moments after our last Shallan flashback chapter. It's the same day, and Shallan has decided that Balat needs to leave. Before, she was trying to convince him not to. They need to stay. They need to not give up on father. But then her father beats Melise, who is his wife. He's Shallan's mother-in-law. And Shallan says, okay, that's enough. You need to you need to leave, take Melise with you, and you need to run. Did either of you catch anything from this chapter? It's a pretty short chapter in comparison to the rest of our content this week, but we can touch on it for a bit.
It is pretty short. I mean, my major takeaways, I think I said this some in our last episode about how just like despisable Shallan's dad is, and this is a very big reason why. Just his like physical like abuse of people, even his wife here, is just very disheartening and difficult. So yeah, that's the main takeaway here, is just how bad it is, and that Balat and Melise and people need to like just get out and run away.
Yeah, I didn't really pick up on anything too new here in this chapter. It seems like it's just kind of reinforcing a lot of already knew. You know, we know that Shallan has something hidden in her father's room in that safe behind the painting. We know that her father's a terrible person. We get some more evidence of that, like you're talking about, Paul. Yeah, the only honestly took note of here is that they decide that they're going to try and get away, or at least Balat is gonna try and get away. But yeah, just more evidence to back up a lot of our already conceived notions.
Yeah, we get a couple weird references to the bright light behind the painting that Shallan's obsessed with in that room. And she goes into the room for the first time since, she doesn't say it, but what we're assuming the day her mother died. It's pretty clear there that it's the first time she's been in here since then. So she does want to rescue Melise, because she walks in there and Melise's arm is broken. Like, Lindavar has beat her, and it's like, it's terrible. And Shallan's, it's in reference to a couple messages, or sorry, a conversation between Kaladin and Shallan later, that Kaladin is accusing Shallan of not being able to be sympathetic to people who are hurting, and Shallan's like, no, well, but we'll get there.
If only you knew.
Yeah. Chapter 66. Before we really dive in to this chapter, shout out to the YouTube channel Man Carrying Thing. He is very funny, and he came out with a skit about this chapter a couple weeks ago, and it was just in time for me to show Paul and Eliot this video, because it's like this minute skit of Adolin and Kaladin going back and forth in this chapter. I thought it was really funny. So shout out to him, and I'll leave a link to his channel in the description on YouTube.
What was the premise, right? If Kaladin was a 90s sitcom,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty funny. I laughed.
It was really good.
All right, so Kaladin gets set free from his jail time for defending Adolin in the duel, and challenging Amaram afterwards. And we learn pretty quickly in this chapter that Adolin has locked himself away with Kaladin in a different cell, and he's been there for as long as Kaladin's been there. Either of you want to pick this up?
I gotta say, I touched on this earlier. My respect for Adolin, which was already fairly high, just shot quite a ways up. Like sometimes it seems like Adolin's flaw is that he doesn't care sometimes about those around him. We know that he has pretty honorable intentions. We know that he's a good guy, but this took him from good guy to like, wow, that was really meaningful what he just did there. So I was Adolin. He just shot up the ranks quite a bit in my esteem for him.
It was very cool. I feel like I wasn't as impacted by it, so maybe I should have been. Not that it wasn't cool or anything, but just like I don't know. I don't fully. It was. I think the best thing accomplished by it was it kind of helped him in Kaladin's eyes to respect him.
Hmm.
But other than that, I feel like it wasn't that big of a deal. Like if he didn't have to go to prison, like he just went. But it does help him a lot with Kaladin, which is incredibly important for our story. Um, so I'm not going to discount it at all. But I guess it wasn't. I don't know. It talks about how he basically wasn't doing it for recognition, but it felt like he was doing it for for recognition still,
Right.
in a little bit. Like I feel like he can't do it not for recognition in some way. Kind of. Anyways, kind of playing
I
devil's advocate a little bit.
I definitely hear you. There was definitely some elements there, and Kaladin was bantering with him a little bit, pointing out like, wait, you still got baths here in jail,
Mhm.
and
Right.
Adolin comes back. Well, the water was cold. It was terrible.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, in
it's
proper
true.
Adolin fashion, he's wearing cologne when he walks out of his prison
Yeah,
cell, and Callan's like,
Yeah.
Wait a minute."
He's like, I'm not a savage. Like, of
Right.
course I'm wearing cologne. Like, what do you mean?
but Paul, I think it does go a long way to not just raise Adolin maybe in our sights, but in Kaladin's. I think this earns a lot of respect with Kaladin to the point where Kaladin even apologizes to him for the way that he acts. And I felt like this was actually a really big step for Kaladin right here to put aside his hatred, and I don't use that word lightly, hatred for Light Eyes, and to apologize to Adolin and say, "Hey, I, I messed up our chance. I did the wrong thing." Like that is huge. I feel like this is a big moment in Adolin and Kaladin's friend. Maybe this is like the moment where you could call it friendship. At this point going forward. So I totally agree. I think this is big for the story.
So this next thing that Adolin does is this for showmanship, if you will, Paul, when he offers Kaladin full plate and blade, coming right out of the prison cell here.
I don't think so. I mean, I thought that was really cool. I was a big fan of that moment. But also it was almost like who else is he going to give it to? I feel like they don't have many other allies at this point.
That's fair.
And Kaladin has like definitely proved himself here. Like it is cool because Adolin does have a great deal of respect for Kaladin now because he kind of saved his life, um, and stuff. And so seeing him offer that was really cool. I that whole situation was interesting because like just how Kaladin refuses it and is like, no, 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 like give it to Moash, and Adolin's like, wait, no, what? Like you don't want this and stuff was kind of funny. Just kind of the character dynamics there, and it almost showed a little bit of how little they know about each other. They know a lot about each other, but also very little, which I think is kind of interesting, and I kind of like it. They're both starting to like respect each other, but they've both kind of been going off of each other's assumptions. Like Kaladin always has this Aelin's a light eyes prince, like he's doing his, pompous thing, and almost vice versa. I feel like Adolin doesn't think about Kaladin that much. But he's just like bodyguard, like gruff guy. Like, of course he wants the shard blade. I mean, everyone does, so that's kind of unfair. But
Right.
um, but yeah, it's an interesting dynamic there. But I feel like that's kind of a major Kaladin trait. Kind of, if you've like spent time with him in training and stuff, like he won't touch a shard blade and things like that. Um, but yeah, also I've been dying to ask on your poster, Trevor, is that Moash with his shard blade?
It is. So this is actually the last spoiler on this poster. Is Moash
Okay.
right here? He actually has a shard blade, and everybody else has spears. So,
That's what I've been thinking about for so long, and it was part. It really was not the reason I came up with it, but that was part of the reason. I was like, yeah, Moash has a shard blade. Like it was kind of alluded to in the past that he could have one, but
right.
But we never found that out. But he gets one, so yeah, it's kind of incredible.
Initially in this scene, I was really frustrated with Kaladin. I was like, we've seen what Kaladin can do with his surge binding abilities, and he just seems like he's meant to have a shard blade. It just feels like that's like the missing piece. A knight's radiant, like that's what's left, and so I just really wanted Kaladin to, take the blade, become a knight radiant, embrace all of that, and just it felt like this could have been the moment. And so when he, won't even touch it and gives it to Moash, it was like, oh, almost. But as I think about it more, I kind of wonder if maybe all that is for the better. I mean, we've seen before when Kaladin touched the shard blade that he heard that screaming in the duel, and so I kind of wonder if maybe him taking this blade or touching it that would happen again. Maybe Kaladin can't even wield shard blades because of that, and so I wonder if him not accepting this is actually for the better. Even though I feel like Windrunner Kaladin with a shard blade would be, an unstoppable force that would be awesome. Maybe it really wouldn't work that way, and this is actually the better path.
He didn't touch this shard blade, so we don't know if it'll scream at him like the other one did. So,
but I'm very nervous that Moash is now the one with the shard blade. I mean, given the last few encounters we've had with him and his plans that we know of to, I don't know, assassinate Elokar, which Kaladin knows full well at this point and is, handing him a very powerful tool, perhaps, in getting that done. So I'm a little nervous now what Moash is going to go do with this show, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I have to say, so from my understanding of the Arbridgeman, Moash seems to be the most like maybe the best fighter out of them. Well, we've seen a lot of stuff from Rock, so I kind of want to say him, but like trained soldier type, it seems like it'd be Moash. And it even talks about how good he was with the shard blade training.
yep.
So it makes a lot of sense, but I still just can't trust Moash yet. He seems way too caught up in like his own desires and things like that.
Right.
But we do see a lot of that here, like how much reverence he has for Kaladin because of it. He's not just like, oh, I got this shard blade, like a haha sucker, like I'm gonna run off. Like he's still very like reverent and loyal to Kaladin.
Right.
Which I really liked. But like you said, Elliot, like we know he wants to assassinate Elokar. Kaladin knows that. Kaladin's even kind of agreed to it with him at this point. Like, yeah, I'll help. Like, I don't like him, so
we'll get to it here in a second.
That's gonna go.
We'll get to it here in a second with chapter 68. But when Adolin and Kaladin are talking about the shard blade later, and Kaladin saying, "Oh, just give it to Moash. That way, there'll be 3 of us that can fight Szeth when he comes back instead of 2." And Adolin says, "Oh yeah, because you don't need a shard blade because of the thing with the stuff." And Kaladin's like, "What? The stuff with the things, and he's just trying to fish for whatever. He's suspicious of Kaladin. He doesn't know what is happening, but he thinks Kaladin is crazy or has some sort of superpowers or something. He's just trying to fish for some sort of information, and Adolin's really bad at it, and it's really funny. Any more with chapter 66 before we go into chapter 67?
Just that the chapter ends with Kaladin like actually agreeing to help Moash assassinate Elokar.
Yeah.
Again, that was a lot of big moments in this chapter. Actually, I felt like that was another moment that was like, uh-oh, now what?
Right.
We've talked before about whether we thought, Kaladin should or should not help Moash, and I'm certainly very firmly on the side of I think that is a terrible decision for, and he seems to be going all in on that path.
We'll talk about it more here in a little bit with the consequences it has to do with Syl in the next couple chapters. But chapter 67, Dalinar and Navani are attending a feast held by Elokar, and almost immediately upon them showing up, everybody is just snickering like behind their sleeves and laughing at Dalinar as he's walking through, and he's kind of used to this at this point. He hasn't been very favored in the Alethi court for a while now, but it's way more obvious at this feast, and it's because Sadeas has published all of Dalinar's visions, but he has doctored them to where it sounds like Navani is like making fun of him the entire time or calling him insane the entire time while making commentary on these visions. And so Dalinar chooses to embrace this instead of run from it in front of the entire court, and that gives him an interesting reaction from a couple different people. Do either of you guys want to pick this up?
The first interesting scenario. This is an interesting move for Sadeas. First off, I'm very curious how Sadeas got a hold of these documents. I don't think it explains that or gives us any hints towards that. There's probably hints in there that I just didn't see, but I'm very curious about that. We know that Sadeas has a network of spies, so I'm assuming it's one of those spies that just snuck in and got a hold of him. But yeah, this is an interesting tactic to try and make Dalinar look like a fool. And as I mentioned with kind of my intro words, I think Dalinar responds to this really well. Actually, he doesn't he doesn't get super offended. He doesn't get super hurt. He doesn't let it get to him. He just embraces it. He just stands up to it and says, "Yeah, you're right. I have been having visions." And that probably was the best possible reaction to this, I think. When his character's been questioned here, they're trying to make fun of him. Just embrace it and say, "Yep, you're right. That is what I am."
Very true. It was very. I would say it's very true to Dalinar's character to have something like this happen and be okay with it, or as okay as you can be, like not letting it get under his skin. Honestly, from what we've seen so far in the Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, looking at a character standpoint, like character traits, I think Dalinar is my favorite because of stuff like this, like how he kind of gets berated nonstop, like borderline persecuted, like doubted for what he stands for and things like that, and how he thinks things should be. And he just it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna keep doing it. Like I'm gonna keep doing what is right.
Right.
And I think that's a really stand-up character trait. So I do really like Dalinar, and that's my biggest takeaway from this chapter. That and also he had a really fun or pretty fun conversation with Wit as usual. Um, but yeah, this chapter was pretty general, I guess. Like nothing crazy happens, but this is like it's kind of sad to see that with basically slandering Dalinar, or kind of dragging him through the mud, trying to make him look bad. Is always sad, but he handles it well.
There's a very specific question that happens towards the end of this chapter, and this is after the feast. Dalinar has made his rounds. He's talked to the high princes that are there. He's saying, yes, I've been seeing these visions. Yes, I want to do something about the Parshendi. Please join me. And Wit is like the last one at the feast. All the master servants are taking all the spheres out. They're packing up the tents, that type of thing. And Wit and Dalinar are kind of the last two there. And Dalinar turns to Wit and asks him, am I a tyrant? And Wit looks and turns to him and looks at him and says, yes, Dalinar, you are. Eliot, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on this were. We don't know too much about Dalinar's past and how he got to be where he is at the moment, but I'm curious what your reactions were to this response from Wit.
I like this question. I like this thought of Dalinar, trying to process this and realizing that maybe he's acting a bit tyrannical, if you will. And I love looking into leadership. I like analyzing how others go about their way and how they lead their followers. And Dalinar is a great little study case for that. But I agree with Wit's take on this. I think that the actions Dalinar is taking are, in a way, the actions of a tyrant. I think he's taking things into his own hand, going kind of maybe not necessarily outside the law, but kind of above and beyond the law to say, I know this is right. I make all of you do it. And it's not a democracy. It's not a vote. You don't get a say in this. I'm going to tell you this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to enforce and make you do it. That is the description of, a dictator or a tyrant. And
right.
That there's the struggle, and I really hope we get to dive into this more in Dalinar's book, the next one, is he justified in doing what he's doing? If your cause is right and good, does that justify forcing other people to follow you?
Right.
That's a really interesting question that I definitely feel like we don't have enough to, answer that for Dalinar, but I hope we get to wrestle with that more in Oathbringer. But I think Dalinar's starting to struggle with it a bit himself and realizing, do I have the right to force everyone to do what I'm telling them to do, even though I know it's the right thing to do?
Wit has a line a little bit later that says, if we had met in different times, I probably would have called you out for what you're doing. But because you have the circumstances that you have in front of you, you're probably what the world needs is a benevolent tyrant, is what he calls him. So yeah, there's some interesting questions there as far as leadership and forcing other people to do what's right even though they don't want to type thing.
Very true. If I talked about how much I like Dalinar, and I definitely stand by it. But if I was just a citizen here looking up to Dalinar, I feel like I just would not be a fan of him. Like, because it is very much like, this is the one thing we're doing. You don't really get a say. Like,
right.
Sorry, but from our reader's perspective, knowing what he's seen, what he's been through, a little bit of it at least, I think he's a really stand-up guy. So I guess that's all about perspective.
Eliot, you said in the outline here that you have a new Dalinar theory. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or did you already talk about that a little bit?
No. So I have a new Dalinar theory, and it's not honestly super related to what's going on in this chapter. It's a little bit kind of a side note, but now's probably the best time to talk about it. Honestly, I thought of this, I think, as I was just reading a Kaladin chapter. It just kind of like, wait a second. what if? Let me back up. So Shalon and right are our two best examples of surge binders or budding knights radiant, and we've kind of seen their journeys, how they got from being normal people to being where they are now. And something that happened with both of them is their abilities, tied to their surge bindery, they manifest themselves before the person really knows what they're doing, right?
Right.
It takes them a little ways to figure out, whoa, I'm wielding powers. And so, this happened with Kaladin, this happened with Shalon. We're not quite sure maybe how it happened with Shalon. We're still figuring that out, but we know that pattern before Shalon realized that he was around. Anyway, all that to say, what if Dalinar's vision are an early manifestation of a surge binding power associated with another order of? What if that ability for him to receive these messages from the Almighty is somehow like an early version of one of those surge powers that he might be able to develop in the future? Implications of this, of course, are obvious, that maybe this is the early signs of him becoming a surge binder, that he's got a spren who's watching him and hanging out with him, and he just spren yet, and maybe he's growing into becoming a knight of another order of the Knights Radiant. All a bit of a crazy theory, not much evidence or anything to point to that, but I was just kind of thinking about the visions and realizing that they're rather mystical and magical, and kind of like a what if?
I don't even think it's as far fetched as maybe you're describing it, Elliot, because there's so much like unnatural stuff or supernatural things going on with Dalinar that at least that's one of the easiest ways to explain it.
Yeah.
It could be like we've talked about Zeth. Is he some like anomaly? It could be that with Dalinar, but I'm kind of in the boat that he's some form of Knights Radiant or will be, because there's like all the stuff with his visions, and then just random things that are just kind of supernatural. Like he can't remember his wife at
Oh
all,
yeah.
and
Hmm.
can't hear, like we never hear her name. Like he just hears like static, like really kind of bizarre things like that. That I think there's got to be a spren in play somehow.
There's also something surrounding Dalinar are the scratches on the walls and on the floor and stuff. Sometimes they line up with his visions, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes he's there, and we're assuming that it's Dalinar writing them, and sometimes it doesn't appear that it could have been Dalinar. So maybe there's something else weird going on there.
Maybe that could be his spren. Maybe there is a spren that's he's beginning to bond with, that's kind of hanging around and watching him. Maybe that's that spren trying to communicate with him.
Right.
The number one thing I want to look for to maybe confirm this is we know that both Shalon and Kaladin's powers, and actually another example we got recently was Lift with her powers. It requires Stormlight, right?
Right.
Every one of these powers requires Stormlight, and so even when they don't realize what they're doing, so I need some evidence maybe of like these visions consuming somehow. That would be a good piece of evidence for this. I don't know that we've seen any hints of that yet, but if we do get some kind of an indication there, that would be helpful.
My only thought on that is, it hasn't all of his visions been like during a high storm?
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah, that was
So
the only thing that I've seen that could indicate
right,
to that.
food for thought is high storms restart, whatever, Stormlight, and he's only getting visions during high storms. So there's
Mm-hmm.
some food for thought for you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that ability requires like a ridiculous amount of stormlight, and so it can only happen during the high storms when there's all that energy around. That could be true. So yeah, that was about Dalinar.
All right. Any more thoughts on 67 before we move on? All right. While we're on the topic of Spren, we're going back to Syl, and Syl is behaving oddly, to say the least, and is worrying Kaladin. Kaladin is trying to use his Stormlight. He's having trouble. He still can at this point, but he's having trouble with it. And then Syl comes down and has an interesting conversation with him. Do either of you remember what she's saying, how she's acting here on the beginning 68?
So Kaladin is noticing that she's starting to act kind of like in the way that she was before she spoke to him, kind of more towards like the native Windspren type activities. She's, distracted by a Kremling that's just kind of crawling around, and she's going back to kind of the more childlike side of her that we initially saw, and less the, mature philosophical side of Syl that we've grown more accustomed to recently.
Right. He's holding a sphere like close to him and trying to surge bind it, I guess you'd say, or whatever the verb there is. And Syl floats down and says, "Oh, what is it?" Like as if she doesn't know she's a Windspren, and is just curious that what is he hiding in his hand, and it's scaring Kaladin that she's acting that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's scaring me that she's acting that way. I'm nervous and trying to figure out why exactly she's doing this. It seems that they talk in the conversation about how Dalinar's now, not Dalinar, Kaladin has now given his word to Moash, but also to protect Elhokar as the bodyguard, and so he's kind of promised both sides, and
Right.
he and Syl kind of are trying to figure out, like, how do we resolve this? How do I stay true to my word when I've given my word to two opposite sides of a conflict? And maybe that's the only reason why this is going down, or maybe there's more to it. I'm not really sure at this point.
Kaladin even says, "Okay, fine, I'll go tell Moash that I'll back out." And Syl turns to him and says, "No, no, no, that's not enough anymore. You have to decide in your heart what's gonna happen here, and like just saying you're not gonna do it isn't enough anymore because you've given your word to both sides."
I wanted to point out something. I'm in my mind, I'm comparing this moment here with Syl, who seems to be like returning back to her non-sentient ways. I'm comparing this back to what I'm now kind of considering like the height of Kaladin and Syl's relationship, and that was the most. If you can remember back to the climax of Way of Kings, where Kaladin turns back towards the plateau where Dalinar and Adolin have been left for dead by Sadeas, and they choose to charge back and save him. If you remember, in that scene, Syl appears life size.
Right.
She appears next to Kaladin full size, and I feel like that's the peak. That was the peak, the awesomeness of Syl, was that moment right there when Kaladin was doing like the ultimate service of sacrificing his life and the lives of the men around him to go save this light-eyed general that he hardly even knows. We've now come quite a ways from that. Kaladin has come quite a ways down from that self-sacrifice to now he's getting wrapped up in this whole thing with Moash. Things are getting more confusing. He's kind of losing sight maybe a bit of what he was meant to be doing. And so Syl started as a Windspren. She got all the way up to that point where she was, full size like a human Kaladin. Now we're almost all the way back to like Windspren. So we've been up, and we're coming back down.
Yeah, as a really big fan of Sylphrena, I'm very sad about this at the moment. Because that means no more good Syl moments for the foreseeable
Right?
future. So I have faith going forward that this bond will be restored. I'm really hopeful at least. I feel like it has to go one way or the other. I don't think it will stay stagnant here. Like either somehow it's gonna be completely broken and it's just bye bye Sil, or it's gonna be restored. And I'm definitely hoping for the restored side.
Me too.
um like in stories and shows and movies in general, I'm kind of okay with like killing off main characters because it's kind of like it cuts deep and makes you feel something. But please don't take so like anyone else,
Anyone.
anyone else. Um, so yeah, I'm really hoping we still have Sil going forward. I'm curious to see how it goes because that could come about in a lot of different ways. Like we said, I very much with the current state of things, I very much believe it's because, like you said earlier, Kaladin gave his word to two sides, and he's guaranteed to not be able to uphold those. Like he cannot go all in with Moash and keep his word to Dalinar and Alucard to protect. He can't do both.
Right.
So he has to make that decision, and not just for Sil, like for himself, I guess is my understanding. Um, so yeah, I don't know what he's gonna do. I'm really curious. Do you have a guess, Elliot? Do you think he's gonna go through with trying to assassinate Alucard with Moash, or is he gonna bail?
I'm not sure. I feel like if he does go through with that and does help Moash with Elokar, it seems like that might be the death knell for Syl. So I really hope he doesn't. I feel like kind of at this point, I feel like Syl's only hope is if Kaladin can turn from that, if he can somehow like progress further into his wind runneriness and figure out how to somehow get to like the next oath that he needs to give. But yeah, I want to have faith in Kaladin. I want to have faith in Kaladin that he's not going to do it. So if you're making me guess, I'm going to guess that Kaladin's going to stay true and he doesn't.
Okay.
That might be just me hoping.
I agree. I'm also hoping for that. My guess as to how things may go forward with that is I think it's going to be like the happy ending, like something my guess is he's going to not only like protect Elkar, he's going to like somehow convince or talk to Moash to like almost like forgive and move on from that. And I think that might be his like upholding and stuff, and it'll come from like a wholesome place. That's what I'm hoping for. That's what I would love to see. Please, Brandon Sanderson. Like, yeah. Usually, I'm kind of on the fence of okay, whatever happens, that'll be exciting. But this, I'm like, okay, come on, like.
Now you're invested.
Yeah, I am.
With this dynamic in mind between Kaladin and Syl, do you guys remember back to one of Dalinar's visions? At Feverstone Keep, they call it the Recreance, and Dalinar is seeing what they now call the Recreance, and it's a bunch of Knights Radiant abandoning mankind, as they say, or as the foreign church would call it. With our knowledge that Knights Radiant have Spren, and seeing this Syl Kaladin interaction, Syl's returning to Syl's returning to be like more of a wind Spren based on these oaths that Kaladin can't hold up, because he's given 2 oaths and he can't hold up both of them. And that's the context we have so far. Do you guys have any predictions, guesses as to Old Knights Radiant, what happened there, given this context?
My initial thought is not that they somehow had conflicting promises, but more just that they abandoned. Like, for example, what we're understanding Kaladin's current objective is his like bodyguard duty, right? Keep
Right.
everyone there safe. And and it's kind of always been the notion of like protecting people for the most part. I'm guessing that with the Knights Radiant, it was just the like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, not like a promise to another side or allegiance or something that conflicted, but just no, I'm out. Like, no, thank you. That's my guess. Fairly basic.
I agree with all that, Paul. I think that's really good, like logic through that. Given the events we saw in that vision, that seems to be the most logical explanation there. It seems like they're just laying down their arms. They're choosing to walk away from being a Knights Radiant, and that alone could be, the breaking of an oath. They're choosing to not stand up for what they said they were going to. So that seems like that could be the whole reason. But the epigraphs that we saw during the last part of this book, where we talked about this a little bit on one of our episodes not too long ago, seemed to hint at something way more complex. And there wasn't enough detail there to tell us exactly what it was, but it sort of hints to like one order betraying the others, perhaps, or some sort of like evil within the Knights Radiant of some kind. I think there's more to it. But I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Pushing past our Silk complex in chapter 68, Moash's eyes are in fact getting lighter. He has bonded his shard blade and his shard plate, and his eyes have turned from like brown to like light tan, I think it says. And Kaladin mentions it, and Moash kind of takes offense at it almost, and
I'm
says,
not one of them.
right. And Kaladin says, "Oh, your eyes are getting lighter." And Moash kind of turns to him and says, "But I'm not one of them. Like, I'm still with you, Kaladin." Like, he's making it very clear to him that, "Oh, I'm still one of the boys. I'm still Bridge 4. I'm not one of those light eyes, So,
Very true. And I'm kind of glad to see that it happened, because I feel like that gives us an answer. There could be some case where it's not true, but this has kind of been a question we've had, not a major top one, but like, oh, does picking up a shard blade actually make you a light eyes? And it shows that it does take like a process. I think this is like a week after or something.
right.
And they said that it would be like another full day before it was fully bonded. But his eyes have gotten lighter, and I thought that was kind of neat.
I fully expected that to be, a superstition, an old wives' tale, that Moash's eyes wouldn't change, and then there'd be kind of this,
Okay.
whole thing about, is he really a true shard bearer if he's still a dark eyes? But no, it seems like it really is changing him. So apparently there is some kind of, metaphysical bond between shard bearer and wielder. So yeah, very magical, which we knew shard blades were already. So I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Yes or no question. If Moash gets his shards removed from him, will his eyes turn back dark, or is he a light eyes now?
Wow, interesting question. I feel like I have no basis on which to guess one way or the other. I guess I would totally completely out of the blue guess that no, they wouldn't change back, that this is a one-time transformation, but I honestly have no idea.
I want to say, like, my gut instinct is that yes, they would change back. I was only trying to think of some other example of like someone who would have a shard blade that would have been a dark eyes beforehand, but I don't know who that would be, because everyone that we've seen is like in these princedoms that are like all light eyes. So
And I don't want to run us down a bunny trail because I know this is long already, but this actually brings up some interesting questions for me, in that up until this point, I was very much assuming that the whole light eyes versus is very much just a prejudice, a racism, if you will, of
Right.
they've just decided that light eyes are better and dark eyes are worse. And then they've built a society structure, based on that, the way someone might, look at skin color, and and draw completely incorrect things based on that. But now, if a shard blade really does change the color of your eyes, is there more to it than just a purely, you know, cosmetic difference? Is there something about having light eyes that has more magical powers to other beings, or is there more to it than just, the kind of like prejudice I was
I just kind of I had a thought about that. That's something I hadn't thought about that much, Elliot, and I'm kind of glad you brought it up. So we don't know much of a history, right, about light versus dark eyes, right? Like we've kind of just assumed it was, I don't know, whenever humanity started, some had light eyes, some had dark eyes, and it was just a thing.
Right.
But I'm wondering if this is kind of going out on a limb. I'm wondering if somehow, whenever the Knights Radiant began, the light eyes were like descendants of the Knights Radiant. Like the Knights Radiant, they had their shards or whatever, and they had light eyes and stuff. And then whenever like they just kept that, and then the people who didn't get that just all had dark eyes. But like, if that makes sense,
yeah.
like somehow
I believe
Enhancer got light eyes because of that, and that could kind of be like a basis, like an original, I guess, reasoning for the difference. Like, oh, like we're blessed and have shard blades or whatever, like we're superior, and that's how that could have began.
I'm going to be paraphrasing this because I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it's in the epilogue of The Way of Kings. Hoyd is kind of musing to himself outside Kholinar, and he's talking about to himself the difference between light eyes and dark eyes. And he says, "Oh, I've been plenty of places where they've chosen the ruling class on something way more trivial than that, but it just so happens that here it's a very good reason why the light eyes are a ruling class and the dark eyes are not." And that's all you get. Just a kind of relevant here.
That's bringing back some memories. I do remember that. The other bit of evidence to maybe throw in this circle also is that the herald that we've seen, Talonel, very specifically is mentioned as having dark eyes.
Correct.
And so there's also that to consider. So it's not like, light eyes are descendant of the heralds, although I think it could maybe be something like you're talking about, Paul, that was, just shard bearers had light eyes, and so that's maybe where all this started or something like that. But yeah, not really sure. But this whole idea with Moash's eyes getting lighter has got me thinking through some of this.
True. And the only other thing that I just thought of about this, from what we've seen, it shows light eyes in a sense that they're kind of like corrupted maybe by greed or selfish desire. Dark eyes are like they've never been portrayed as perfect, but they seem more like reasonable or maybe honorable. Definitely, like there's lots of bad on both sides, but it makes me think that the light eyes origin could also be with what I was saying, that they were the original Knights Radiant and started that way because they all kind of maybe went back on their oath and things, and that's how all the Spren were bonds were broken and things like that. And maybe that's just kind of a testament of character, kind of the descendants coming from that line of maybe like like not honorable group.
If you
Things like that. So
if you were to ask Kaladin, I think that's what he would say, that all the dark eyes are the honest, good working class, and then the light eyes are the dishonorable, snobby upper class that don't deserve anything.
yes, Kaladin approves of this message.
Yes. we have a banter scene between Shallan, Adolin, and Kaladin. Kaladin calls Adolin obnoxious to his face, and Adolin doesn't understand what he's saying, so he thinks it's a compliment. Shallan kind of chides him for that, and then they all fall in the chasm. And that leads us to chapter 69. Either of you want to talk about anything else in chapter 68 before we jump into 69? All right, I think for the rest of this chapter and all of next week, little minor spoilers, I'm going to be using the word banter quite a bit. So because there's some very quality dialogue in these chapters coming up next week from Brandon Sanderson. So chapter 69, Kaladin and Shallan fall into a chasm and they wake up next to each other. Shallan kind of walks around the corner and Kaladin immediately assumes, oh, I must have saved Shallan somehow. And Shallan, when we get to her point of view later in the chapter, she's like, I guess I saved Kaladin somehow. So both of them are assuming that they saved the other. We know, or I guess we are assuming that we know that they each saved themselves with their Stormlight. Kaladin's having some trouble, though, after this. And we've got some interesting tidbits in here. Did either of you want to pick this up?
So I'm trying to figure out what exactly happened with Kaladin as he's falling through the air, because I feel like this is really important. This seems to be the moment that perhaps something terrible happens to Syl. As he's falling, he's trying to suck in Stormlight. He's trying to save himself. He knows that's my only way to survive is if I can get some Stormlight in my body. He can't get it. He can't get it. He can't get it. And then he does get it. But he hears Syl scream this terrible scream. The book even says that vibrated Kaladin's very bones. And then he hits the ground and survives. And so that like two sentences I feel like are really important. Like what just happened there? Did he just like force Syl to give him Stormlight when he didn't deserve it, or when he, Syl wasn't willing to give it? Is that the act that finally Syl? Or like I'm not really sure. I'm not quite sure how to process exactly what just happened here, but it's definitely bad.
Right.
I do want to point out that I noticed that Syl does not show up for the rest of this chapter. And it's just kind of, he's very worried, but he's not like super worried just yet by the end of this chapter. He still is just kind of, oh, Syl does kind of disappears and sometimes she comes back and he's kind of, calling out for her, trying to talk to her at some point. But I was very closely looking for, please, Syl, come back and talk to him. And she doesn't. By the end of this chapter, at least, we have not heard anything from Syl, which seems, again, bad. Very bad.
Yeah. Paul?
Rest in peace.
Better not be.
Yeah. So I guess I didn't think that much about Syl or the Syl scream when they're falling. So kind of, I guess, moving on a little bit from that, just over this chapter as a whole, I'm curious to see what happens here. Kaladin and Shallan don't really like each other and stuff, but this was kind of a cliffhanger chapter almost. Like they fall into
Is there a pun intended there?
Like, hanger.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they fall into this, and so now they kind of stuck together. There were other people on the bridge, right? And they kind of all died, which was very sad. But we're taking that as just like they check the bodies and stuff and make sure it's not like Adolin or anyone like
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Of like high power. But yeah, it was honestly very sad. I'm curious. Like someone basically cut the bridge, right?
Yep.
Like that's the understanding that there's like a emergency like lever or something. And I'm honestly more curious to know what happened there because it doesn't say anything about that, does it? It's just like, oops, the bridge fell. Like,
There's a couple interesting lines that at the end of chapter 68 and the beginning of chapter 69, the Kaladin's hearing horns, the battle horns. The Parshendi are attacking them at the same moment that one of we're assuming Sadius is inside Sadius's spy, because Kaladin recognizes the engineer who pulls the emergency switch as somebody who's in Sadius's war camp. And so as he's running to save Dalinar, and Adolin turns and like tackles Dalinar off the bridge as the lever's pulled, and Shallan and Kaladin fall. But at the same moment, they're getting attacked by Parshendi. So is that a coincidence? What's that about?
Yeah, really not sure what that's about either, because as far as we know, the Parshendi aren't going on bridge runs anymore, right? They're
Correct.
not contesting the Alethi for the gem hearts anymore. So was this a coordinated thing somehow where the bridges dropped and the Parshendi attack at the same time? Or is this just kind of random chance that they just kind of venture to Parshendi territory and the Parshendi decide, oh, might as well get them, and it just kind of happens at the same time?
And
Not sure.
but why are the Parshendi there in the first place? They're not even gonna get after a gem heart. Shallan's just
Right.
out that far to get a sketch of a chrysalis that doesn't have a gem heart in it anymore. So what are the Parshendi doing there?
Good question.
I was kind of sad that it makes the detail that whoever pulled the lever is recognizable from Sadius's camp, because I honestly had kind of the theory that maybe Moash pulled it. Even though I don't think he's there, but my guess was going to be Moash pulled it because even though Kaladin has agreed to work with him, he doesn't want anyone knowing of his plans. I wanted to like, oopsie, like.
Do you think Moash would
be
backstab Kaladin?
I think that would be a very crazy twist, and that's why I'm going out on the limb. But yeah, I think it does make that description that it was like someone from Sadius's camp. So it's probably just a Sadius like scheme again.
Right.
I think so, yeah.
But that was honestly where my mind went, because I'm expecting some big plot twist as we come up to the end of part 4. Part 4 is usually a pretty wild ride, or at least it was in the Way of Kings. So
Right.
I'm expecting something kind of big going forward.
We've still got like 5 chapters yet for your twist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Kaladin and Shallan are at the bottom of the chasm. They start walking back, and that's kind of where we end. Any closing thoughts for 69 or the whole episode here?
Just the irony of their situation now, the two people that maybe hate each other. I don't want to say hate each other the most, because Kaladin does hate some other particular light eyes a lot more than Shallan, but the two that have definitely butt heads quite a bit in the past are now going to have to rely on each other to survive. So we could be in for some entertaining reading up ahead.
Right.
Very true.
Anything else?
That's it.
Alrighty. We can end here, and we can reconvene for the end of part 4 next week. Thanks for joining me this week, Paul and Eliot.
All right, let's do it.
Toodles.